Nobody was supposed to get hurt today. That was the promise Colonel Marsh made when he signed off on the visit. A routine medical clearance. 20 minutes, tops. Then Titan came through the doors of Brooke Army Medical Center, and 20 minutes became the longest morning anyone on the 3rd floor could remember. Hard. He was 100 pounds of black and tan muscle, a German shepherd with a torn left ear and a scar across his muzzle that nobody liked to ask about. 2 handlers held his leash. Both of them were sweating. "He's never been like this," one of them said, breathless, dragging his boots against the tile. "He bit Corporal Ruiz 2 weeks ago," the other answered. "Not a nip. A bite." Behind the observation glass, a dozen hospital staff had gathered without meaning to. Word traveled fast in a place like this. The dog they couldn't control was back. A young resident leaned toward an older nurse. "They're not seriously going to leave someone alone in there with him." The older nurse didn't answer. She was watching a woman walk calmly down the hallway toward the examination room, carrying nothing but a clipboard and a paper cup of water. Her name was Grace Whitfield. Nobody had asked her to be here. She hadn't asked to be asked. "Wait," the resident said. "Is that?" "Yeah," someone whispered. "That's the trauma nurse, the quiet one." Through the glass, they watched the door close behind her. Titan's growl rose, low and constant, like something grinding metal. They expected screams. They expected an alarm, a panic button, a dog lunging at a woman's throat. Instead, 30 seconds later, the growling stopped. And what happened after that? Nobody in that hallway would ever be able to fully explain. 3 weeks earlier, Titan had arrived for what should have been his final retirement physical. 9 years old. Silver creeping into his muzzle. A decorated career behind him, 2 deployments, 1 Purple Heart equivalent for K9s, a folder of commendations thick enough to need its own drawer. On paper, he was a hero. In person, he was a problem nobody wanted to touch. It started small. He wouldn't let the vet techs near his front paws. Then he wouldn't let anyone near his chest. Then, 2 weeks before this particular morning, he'd bitten down on Corporal Ruiz's forearm, hard enough to need 4 stitches, the first bite in Titan's entire service record. After that, the file got a red flag stapled to the front. Aggressive behavior. Handle with extreme caution. Do not approach without 2 Henler restraint. His current handler, Staff Sergeant Owen Blake, had only had him for 8 months. Titan was his 3rd K9 partner, and by far his hardest. "He's not aggressive." Blake kept telling anyone who'd listen. "I've seen aggressive, this isn't that." Nobody believed him. It's hard to argue with stitches. That morning, Blake walked Titan through the hospital's front doors with 2 extra handlers as backup, per new protocol. Titan was calm in the parking lot, calm in the lobby. Veterans smiled at him. A little boy in a wheelchair reached out, and Titan let him pat his head without flinching. Then they turned down the 3rd floor corridor, the one with the long wall of windows, the wing where wounded soldiers used to recover, and something in him changed instantly, like a switch flipped in his chest. His ears went flat, his tail dropped. A sound came out of him that wasn't quite a growl and wasn't quite a whine, something in between, something that made the hair on Blake's arms stand up. "Easy, buddy. Easy." Titan planted all 4 feet and would not move. They dragged him gently into the exam room. He immediately backed into the far corner, eyes locked on the door, breathing hard and fast. Dr. Patricia Chen tried first. Calm voice, slow movements, treats he wouldn't touch. Nothing. The base's senior behavioral specialist tried next, sitting on the floor for 20 minutes, offering his favorite toy, a chewed-up tennis ball Titan used to carry everywhere. Titan didn't even look at it. By the 3rd failed attempt, word had spread through the entire wing. "There's a dog nobody can handle, a war hero who's turned dangerous, Somebody used the word put down. It was quiet, almost a joke, the kind of thing said by someone who didn't understand what they were saying. But Blake heard it, and his jaw went tight, and he didn't speak to that person again for the rest of the day. By 11 that morning, the exam room had become a small crowd of failure. 4 hours in, and nobody, not the vet, not the specialist, not his own handler, had been able to get within 6 feet of Titan without triggering that same low, terrible sound. That was when someone, half joking, said her name. Grace Whitfield had worked at Brook for 11 years. She wasn't the loudest person on the floor, and she wasn't the one people went to for gossip. She was the one they went to when a patient wouldn't stop screaming, when a grieving family needed someone who wouldn't rush them, when a scared new soldier needed his IV changed without flinching. She had a gift, though nobody had ever quite put a name to it. She didn't fix things, she just stayed, steadily. Without needing anything back, when the joke reached her, maybe Nurse Whitfield can work her magic on the dog too. She was refilling a chart 3 doors down. She didn't laugh. She didn't roll her eyes either. She simply finished what she was doing and walked toward the noise. "You don't have to do this," Blake told her at the door, his voice rough with exhaustion. "He's not himself. I don't know what's wrong with him." "I know," Grace said. "I just want to sit with him for a minute." "He bit someone. 2 weeks ago, I heard." Blake studied her face, looking for fear or bravado or anything he could push back against. He found neither, just a strange, quiet calm, like she already knew something the rest of them didn't. "All right," he said finally. "But if he shows teeth, you get out. Understood?" "Understood." The door closed. 20 pairs of eyes pressed against the observation glass. Grace didn't walk toward Titan. She didn't call his name, didn't crouch down with outstretched hands the way every trained professional before her had done. She simply lowered herself to the floor near the door, several feet away, set her clipboard down, and went still. For a full minute, nothing happened. Then something did. Titan's head, which had been pressed low against the wall, lifted an inch. His nose twitched. Once, twice. He was smelling something. Not her hand, not her clothes. Her. "What's he doing?" Dr. Chen whispered through the glass. Nobody answered. Nobody knew. Grace hadn't moved, hadn't spoken, hadn't done a single thing differently than the last 3 people who'd failed. And yet the growling, that low, grinding sound that had filled the room for 4 hours, had gone completely silent. Titan took 1 step away from the wall. Behind the glass, Blake's breath caught in his throat. He hasn't moved toward anyone all morning. Another step, then another. Slow, deliberate. His head low, but his eyes locked on Grace's face, like he was reading something written there. Grace didn't look directly into his eyes. She knew better than that. Some old instinct telling her a direct stare would feel like a threat. She looked slightly past him, toward his shoulder, and waited. Titan stopped less than 3 feet away, close enough to touch. Far enough that everyone in that room held perfectly still, afraid that a single breath in the wrong direction would break whatever fragile thing was happening. Then, so softly it was almost silent, Grace began to hum. It wasn't a command. It wasn't a trick anyone had taught her. It was a tune, simple, old, 4 notes repeating, the kind of melody a mother hums to a child half asleep in the back seat of a car. Titan's ears, pinned flat for 4 hours straight, rose. His whole body seemed to soften at once, like a held breath finally released. "That's..." Dr. Chen started, then stopped, unable to finish the sentence, because she didn't know what it was, only that something enormous had just shifted in that room. Titan closed the last 3 feet in a single motion and pressed his head against Grace's shoulder. A gasp went through the observation hallway. Someone actually put a hand over their mouth. Grace still hadn't reached for him. She let him decide. Slowly she lifted one hand and rested it against the side of his neck, and Titan exhaled, a long shaking breath, like something that had been held in his chest for years. Blake pushed through the door before anyone could stop him. He froze in the doorway, staring. "He hasn't let anyone touch him like that," he said quietly. "Not once, not even me, not in 8 months." Grace looked up at him, and for the first time that morning, something uncertain crossed her face. "I don't understand this either," she said. "I've never met this dog before in my life. Nobody in that room believed her, not because they thought she was lying, but because what they'd just watched made it impossible to believe anything except that this dog knew her." Word moved through the hospital like wildfire. By the time Colonel Marsh arrived to see for himself, half the 3rd floor had already heard some version of the story, and most of them had it wrong. The nurse used to be a K9 trainer. She fostered him as a puppy. She's some kind of dog whisperer. Grace corrected each rumor as gently as she could, but nobody quite listened, because the alternative, that this was simply unexplainable, was harder to accept than a tidy story. Colonel Marsh watched through the glass as Titan lay down beside Grace's chair, his chin resting on her foot, more relaxed than anyone had seen him in months. "Mrs. Whitfield," he said carefully once she stepped out, "I need to ask you something, and I need an honest answer. Have you ever worked with military working dogs? Any program, any base, any time in your life?" "No, sir." "Fostering? Volunteer training?" "No." He studied her the way Blake had, searching for the hole in her story. He didn't find one, because there wasn't one, not in the way he was looking for it. "Then how do you explain what just happened in there?" Grace looked back through the glass at Titan, who had lifted his head and was watching her through the window now, ears forward, tail giving one slow sweep across the floor. "I don't think I can," she said. Not yet, but something had started nagging at the back of her mind. A tune, a room she hadn't thought about in almost 6 years. A soldier whose name she'd tried very hard to forget, because remembering hurt too much. She just wasn't ready to say it out loud. It was Blake who found the answer 3 days later, buried in Titan's original service file, the one from before his current deployment record, back when he'd had a different handler entirely. "Sergeant Marcus Reyes," Blake read aloud, standing in Grace's break room doorway with a folder in his hands. "That name mean anything to you?" The color drained from Grace's face so fast that Blake instinctively stepped forward, thinking she might need to sit down. "Marcus," she said quietly. "Yes, I knew him. 6 years earlier, before her current assignment, Grace had worked hospice care in the Wounded Warrior Recovery Wing. Sergeant Reyes had come in after an IED explosion overseas, injuries too severe to survive, though it took 11 difficult weeks for that truth to become certain. Titan, then just 5 years old, had been his canine partner for 4 years by that point. And under special compassionate care exception, the dog had been allowed to visit. Titan wasn't permitted in the room during medical procedures, but during the quiet hours, in the evenings, he was allowed to lie under Reyes's hospital bed, pressed against the floor, waiting. Grace remembered him there. A young dog, confused and frightened by machines and beeping monitors and a handler who no longer smelled the way he used to. She remembered crouching down during her rounds, on nights when Reyes was too weak to reach for him, and gently stroking Titan's head so he wouldn't feel so alone in the dark. And she remembered the nights Ritz couldn't sleep from the pain, when nothing the medication did was quite enough, and she would sit beside his bed and hum the same simple lullaby her own mother used to sing to her, 4 notes over and over, low and steady, because it was the only thing she had that might help. Titan had been under that bed every single time. He remembered the song. Grace whispered, her hand pressed to her mouth. Not me. The song. Both, Blake said quietly. I think it was both. Sergeant Reyes had died 11 days before Grace's assignment ended. Titan had been reassigned to active duty 6 months later, given a new handler, sent back overseas, and had served without incident for years afterward, until his retirement, until hospitals started meaning something different to him again, until the smell of antiseptic and the sound of machines began dragging him back to a room he'd never fully left. Nobody had connected the dots. Nobody had known there was a connection to find. Grace visited Titan again the next morning, and this time there was no crowd behind the glass, no clipboard of concerned staff, just Blake standing quietly by the door and a 9-year-old German shepherd who rose the moment she walked in and crossed the room without hesitation. She sat down on the floor the same way she had the first time. Titan lay across her lap, all 100 pounds of him, his silver-flecked muzzle resting against her arm. I'm sorry. I stopped coming, she said softly, though she knew it made no logical sense to say it to a dog. I didn't know you'd remember. Blake cleared his throat from the doorway. For what it's worth, he said, I don't think this was about a smell or a song, ma'am. I think some part of him has been looking for you since the day Sergeant Reyes died. I think that's what the hospitals were doing to him. Every single one felt like walking back into that room, waiting for someone who never came. Grace's eyes filled, but she didn't look away from the dog. He's not dangerous, she said. He was never dangerous. He was just grieving somewhere nobody could see it. Word of what had really happened moved through Brooke Army Medical Center differently than the rumors had. This time, it moved with something closer to reverence. Nurses who had laughed a week earlier now stopped by the K9 wing just to see him settle when Grace walked past. The vet techs stopped flagging his file as aggressive. Corporal Ruiz, the man Titan had bitten, came by one afternoon and sat quietly in the hallway, watching through the glass, and later told Blake it was the first time he understood. The bite hadn't been about him at all. 6 weeks later, Colonel Marsh established a new policy at the base, a small note added to every retiring K9's file, asking about any handlers, caretakers, or hospice staff from earlier in the dog service who might still be reachable. Because sometimes the policy read, the thing a retired working dog needs most isn't a new command. It's an old memory, kept safe by someone who never stopped caring. Grace kept visiting Titan every week after that, not as a nurse fulfilling a duty, but simply because she wanted to. Blake noticed that Titan started sleeping through the night again. Something his file noted he hadn't done in months. He noticed the dog's appetite came back. He noticed, most of all, that the low, grinding growl that had filled that exam room on the first day never returned. Not once, not even during his loudest, busiest shifts in the hospital wing. On the 1-year anniversary of Sergeant Reyes's passing, Grace brought a small framed photo to the K9 wing, a picture she'd kept in a drawer for 6 years without being able to look at it. It showed a young soldier laughing with a much younger Titan pressed against his leg. She set it on the shelf near Titan's kennel. He sniffed it once, then lay down beneath it, the same way he used to lie beneath a hospital bed, watching over someone he loved. Some dogs, Blake said quietly, watching from the doorway. Don't forget, they just wait. Grace nodded, wiping her eyes. Then I guess, she said, the least we can do is come back.